That's perfect. And Brian's going to start bringing up a couple of slides there. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to the background to this project and then hand back over to Brian, who's going to then be talking about the work that's happened this year. Now that's perfect. So if that could be, yeah, that's great. So as I say, welcome everyone to the Seabird Monitoring and Conservation webinar about Islands Eye. So as I say, my name is Lorraine and Brian Burke is here from BirdWatch Ireland and he project managed the bird survey work and also the monitoring. So just to give you a little bit of context, the next slide.
Fair enough.
This this project was based on Islands Eye. So Islands Eye is a small island off the coast of Howth in North County Dublin. It's within the area of Fingal Council. The island is a special place, even though it's very small. It's designated under the EU Birds and also the Habitats Directive. It's a special area of conservation for its perennial vegetation of stony banks, vegetation of drift lines, and also intertidal and subtidal reefs. But it's also a special protection area for the birds that you can see listed there. And it's part of the Dublin Bay UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. And around the island, there's also protected mammals, such as hobble porpoises and seals. But there's also rare plants on the island as well. So from Fingal's perspective, next slide. We devised a management plan for the island. There were some severe fires back in 2016, which destroyed a lot of the habitat on the island. So we produced with Natura consultants the Islands Eye management plan. And a lot of this had been informed also by work that BirdWatch had done. We commissioned BirdWatch to do surveys, and they had done surveys themselves on the island. But the management plan was to understand the significance of the island, identify issues which could threaten it, agree appropriate policies to guide the management of the island, and also agree a series of actions to achieve the objectives of the plan and its agreed policies. So next slide. So BirdWatch Ireland had reported both through reports but also through verbal reporting to Fingal Council that there were a lot of impacts to habitats and specifically birds on the island. So this was there were high levels of disturbance to nesting birds, which Brian will go into in more detail. There was also jet skis, kayakers, and walkers that were disturbing both seals and also birds. There's also boats, fishing boats, and other boats coming too close to the island. And there was also rats on the island as well. And these concerns over time, we also were concerned there could be another fire from discarded barbecues. So to this end, that information informed the management plan. And then the actions then for 2025, if you want to move that on, Brian. We looked at and some of this, as I say, came from reports from BirdWatch Ireland. We looked at zoning Islands Eye. So the areas there you can see in yellow are the seabird nesting areas, and we have those as no entry areas. So we installed some fencing on that, but also some signage. And we also did more specific looped paths. So that's the green pathway there that you can see that leads around the island. So between the seabird areas, we're asking people not to enter, to not disturb the birds, improving pathways around the island. It's part of the measures that we put in place. So next slide. So crucially for 2025, we have no dogs now allowed on the island. So Howth Castle actually introduced measures to prohibit the ferry company that delivers visitors to the island. They are not allowed to transport passengers with dogs. So that's had a major positive impact, for this year. We installed fencing, as I said, so that's just a picture there, top right, of some of that fencing, and that goes right across access to key breeding areas, and that's really to reduce the footfall or to prevent footfall from visitors to the island. And I guess to put that into context, we had a huge volume of reports from BirdWatch and others over the years about disturbance, so that's why we've put that in. We've also trialed, though, new signage, and this signage is more engaging. It's the birds actually asking people to be careful of their chicks and not to approach too close. We've also installed waymarkers on the island, clearer walking routes, and also an information lectern which has a map. So next slide. And then crucially, this brings us on to a kind of the key focus for this evening. As part of the funding from the National Parks and Wildlife Service through the Local Biodiversity Action Fund, we managed to secure funding to contract BirdWatch Ireland to carry out a pilot warden scheme, and also update the seabird census for the island as well. And these wardens were hired, as part of our work with BirdWatch Ireland. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to Brian. So that was just the context of where a lot of these actions were coming from. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Brian.
Hi everyone, just give me a second. I'm going to see if I can disable the waiting room so that people, as they continue to come in, um, won't need a thumbs up from me. How do I do that? Stop sharing. Sorry, no, give me two
That's all
seconds.
right.
Do- Disable waiting room. Okay, there we go. Now, where was I? Share screen. Now, Lorraine, does that all look okay to you?
Yep, that's great.
Okay,
So I
perfect.
can see that. So that's perfect.
Excellent. Hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Brian Burke. I work for BirdWatch Ireland. We're the largest conservation NGO in Ireland. We've about 15,000 members. We're a charity, so we've people who pay a paid membership to support the organization. We have a national reach. We have about 25 to 35 core staff, and then during the summer, when we're working on projects like this on Ireland's Eye, we hire field workers for the summer. So in the summer, we could have another 20 staff. And I suppose we work in a lot of different areas in conservation, so kind of very on the ground kind of stuff, surveys and monitoring to find out how species are doing, policy and advocacy, because quite often some of the best conservation you could do is at policy level, whether it's national laws and regulations or at European level as well. Communications to make sure people know what's going on, know how birds are doing, and people appreciate birds. And obviously, we have an admin team as well that keeps the whole organization ticking. So my job is Senior Seabird Conservation Officer. So I work on conservation projects for seabirds, research monitoring, and all of that feeds into policy. Just a quick plug as we're coming up to Christmas. We're a charity. We do need people to pay a membership every year that really supports the organization. So if you're stuck for a Christmas gift, please do keep in mind BirdWatch Ireland membership. You get a lovely welcome pack and you get the Wings magazine 3 times throughout the year as well. And I'll start off as well by getting the thanks out of the way. So this project, it's a really, really fantastic project to be involved in. It was funded through the Local Biodiversity Action Plan Fund, which is a pot of funding that is incredibly useful, across the country, in getting things done that I suppose have been on people's to-do lists and wish lists for years and years and years. So that is issued for this project through Fingal County Council and the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Lorraine and her colleagues in Fingal County Council have been absolutely fantastic. Um, there's been work done on Ireland's Eye over many years with the same recommendations, the same wish list for a lot of the things that have been achieved this year. And Lorraine has been fantastic in spearheading that and getting it done. And equally, Mairead Stack is the local conservation ranger in Fingal, and her colleagues in the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and Owen at Howth Castle Estate as well. You hear the term collaborative conservation more and more. Projects like this would not even get off the ground if it wasn't for a lot of people singing off the same hymn sheet and working together. So thank you to all of them. This has been a fantastic project for us to be involved in. And then Mark and his team at Howth Cliff Cruises deserve a shout out as well because they were fantastic in getting us out to the island on a very regular basis throughout the summer too. So we're very grateful to them. Then, of course, so we've Emmett and Siona. They were the two wardens who worked in Ireland's Eye for BirdWatch Ireland as part of this project this year. They were out there 5 days a week. They were monitoring seabirds. They were watching people. They were talking to people. They were feeding all of this back so we can hopefully improve this project year on year. And the two of them were absolutely fantastic. So we're really grateful to Emmett and Siona for all their hard work this summer. They had a big to-do list and they were kept very busy, but they did a fantastic job. When it came to the censusing and the productivity monitoring, they were supported by other Seabird field workers in BirdWatch Ireland, and equally, we had done some monitoring in 2024 as well. So we're very grateful to all the staff this year, last year, and even in previous years, going back to 2016 and 2017. People like Tara Adcock and Andrew Power and Olivia Crow all worked on Ireland's Eye, doing the monitoring and making a lot of the recommendations that have kind of come to pass in the last year or two. And then Oscar Myrne, the late Oscar Myrne deserves a mention as well, who worked for the National Parks and Wildlife Service, but did a huge amount of monitoring of the seabirds in Ireland's Eye in the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s as well. So, Ireland has 24 regular breeding seabirds. 23 of those are either red listed or amber listed. So we use a traffic light system to say what level of concern, I suppose, a species is at. Red listed is the high level concern. Amber listed is medium level concern. And green listed is, not really a conservation concern at the moment. So 23 of our breeding seabirds are either red or amber listed. Um, One species isn't. It's green listed in Ireland, but actually that's the great black-backed gull, and they're suffering huge declines in a lot of the other parts of their range. So just to give you some context about how Ireland seabirds are doing and why projects like this are so important. Now, the threats and pressures that they face and the reasons that they're under such either negative trends or restricted to very few places. It's very complicated. It involves things like habitat loss. They don't have the places to breed that they had historically. Predation, sometimes that's native predators, sometimes it's non-native predators, rats, mink, foxes, sometimes it's gulls, all those kinds of things. Disturbance, and I'll touch on disturbance later on, but just these birds, they spend their 8 months of their life more at sea, and they come back to these specific places like Ireland's Eye to breed, to spend 2 months, finding a mate, laying an egg, raising a chick, and hopefully that fledging that chick, and disturbance can have a big impact on that. Pollution, things like oil spills, and just kind of chemical pollution and stuff like that in the sea. Thankfully, that is probably better than it has been in previous decades, but you'll all remember the oil spill in the Irish Sea. I think it was 2 years ago, that impacted a lot of common guillemots. So even though this stuff happens less, pollution, there's still a very real threat of it, and it can have a huge impact when it does occur. Climate change negatively impacts seabirds in a million and one different ways. It can be weather in the summer, rain and cold and wind that stops them feeding or chills their eggs and their chicks. It can be weather in the winter and causing these big storms that again prevents them feeding and causes mortality of adults. These are very long-lived seabirds. They have a very kind of slow and steady attitude to reproducing. So anything that reduces adult survival rates can have a huge impact on populations. Equally, climate change can cause shifts in fish stocks. They can move to different places. The timing of the fish availability can change, and that impacts seabirds as well. Avian flu is a very real threat. We've had, for a lot of species, it's been worst case scenario in the last couple of years, and you'll know that avian flu is circulating now in our wintering waterbirds at the moment, and that is a very serious threat. At the moment as well. And then offshore renewable energy, obviously there's a lot of plans for offshore renewable energy in the coming years, which is good. We need offshore renewable energy. It's a great opportunity. It's really, really important to decarbonize our economy and fight things like climate change via that. But obviously, depending on where those wind farms go and how they're designed, there can be impacts on seabirds as well. So a lot of threats, very complex, depending on the species and the location and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of these, they're big scale threats. They're big scale, they're long term, they're things that need to be, addressed via policy, and, things like that. When it comes down to, I suppose, an individual summer and an individual site, you can't do much about climate change, you can't do much about food availability. Two things you can do something about are predation and disturbance. And that's two things that have been tackled this year on Ireland's Eye. So to focus in on seabird disturbance. So we define disturbance. What do we mean by disturbance? I suppose human activity that changes the behavior of the birds, basically. It's as simple as that. Um, and the impact of that, varies. It depends on the reaction of the bird. It might depend on the number of birds affected. It might depend on the duration of the disturbance, and it might depend on the frequency of the disturbance. So you might have a very short duration disturbance of someone walking past a few nesting birds. They flush off the nest and they come back quickly. And that might be fine and that might be very low impact. But if another person's coming along 5 minutes later, another person 5 minutes later, over the course of a day, right throughout the breeding season, that can have a huge impact. So I suppose thinking about Ireland's eye, who's responsible for disturbance? It's everybody really. It's tourists maybe visiting the island for the first time. It's local people who've been visiting the island every summer for their lives. It's, families coming out looking for picnics, photographers, wildlife enthusiasts. Sometimes people are, they want to go out and see the seabirds, but they don't realize that they're having an impact via disturbance. There can be disturbance on the water as well, kayakers, fishing boats, windsurfers, all that kind of stuff. Um, Dogs, even dogs on leads, birds just see them as a predator, essentially, as a canid predator. So they cause a huge amount of disturbance, and drones as well. There's potential, depending on how they're used, in relation to seabird nesting areas, can have an impact too. Generally, people don't want to cause disturbance. Generally it's accidental. People are in these islands and these coastal sites to whether it's enjoying the scenery or the habitats or the birds, they don't want to cause disturbance. And so it's quite often it's accidental. Most people, when you talk to them, welcome the idea of signs and designated paths and wardens because, they cause the disturbance accidentally. They don't want to have this negative impact. They need that little bit of help to steer them in the right direction. In terms of, I suppose, how disturbance has that negative impact, quite often it results in birds coming off the nest. If birds come off the nest, there's a risk of eggs chilling, getting wet. There's a risk of chicks chilling and getting wet. Um, Eggs can get crushed by birds panicking and flying off all of a sudden. When you're talking about the likes of guillemots and razorbills, eggs can roll off the side of cliffs. If you have, someone sitting maybe near a nest, or a burrow or something like that, it might not look like disturbance is being caused, but maybe there's an adult with a beak full of food that won't fly back to that chick because you're sitting there. So things like chicks not being fed, maybe partners want to do a swap, if they're incubating an egg and they can't do that again because they think you're a predator, and they see you there. Chicks can wander as the adults, get up and start giving you all their attention. The chicks can start to wander. They can get lost. They can get attacked. They can fall, off the side of a cliff, and maybe the parents won't find them. And there's an opportunity for predators as well when there's disturbance. So you might flush kittiwakes or guillemots from a cliffside, and they might be reluctant to come back until you're well out of sight. But a herring gull or a hooded crow might come in pretty quickly and clear out a few nests. And you do see that in a lot of seabird colonies where there are certain individual predators that just wait for those opportunities because they know they're coming. Um, and it's important to remember as well, birds don't always flush and fly off the nest and they don't always swoop at you. That's not, the definition of disturbance. There's much more to it than that. Sometimes the bird will sit on the nest and they will give out to you. They'll be calling and screaming at you. There's a lot of studies that show, even birds that don't look like they're reacting on the outside, as you get closer, their heart rate is increasing, their stress hormones are increasing, and that can impact them. They might not get back to normal, essentially. Sometimes it's a day or two, depending on the species and how familiar they are with disturbance. Um, so sometimes it's obvious birds get off the nest, birds swoop at you like this great black gull here. Sometimes it's very, very subtle, and you can't assume that just because a bird isn't going absolutely mental, that it isn't being disturbed. You have to be very, very aware. So all of this impacts breeding success. A lot of these birds lay one egg, maybe two eggs, per summer. Invest a huge amount of time and energy in laying that egg, looking after their partner and doing these swap overs to look after the egg for a month, maybe until it hatches. Then it's probably another month at least, if not longer, of feeding chicks, and raising those chicks and hoping that, ultimately they'll produce enough chicks in their lifetime to replace themselves. So all of these little things, and especially it's not just you doing it in a place like Ireland's Eye, there's people coming and going all day, every day, right throughout the summer. So these things do have a very significant impact. And there's other sites then as well as potential for standing on eggs. People might be familiar with the Portran Little Tern project or the Kilcool Little Tern project. You could walk on that beach and accidentally stand on eggs without even realizing it. If you think of places with puffins, so like Great Saltee, for example, there's potential that you'll crush burrows that are used by puffins and Manx shearwaters. And again, you might not even realize it, but it is a problem. There's a very, very nice study done a few years ago on Great Saltee. A UCC student called Debs Albrook, working with John Quinn, looked at disturbance of the gannet colony in Great Saltee. And they found essentially, you can see the writing there, but the nests at the edge of the colony, where the people tended to go down and get close to the gannets, they had much lower breeding success than the gannets in other parts of the colony where people weren't getting too close. So disturbance was having a negative impact on the breeding success there. And point number two there, the number of birds displaced by visitors correlated negatively with the minimum visitor approach distance. Basically, closer you get, the more birds you flush, and the bigger the problem is. So that was a very, I suppose it's one of these things you could say we instinctively we know anyway, but it's great to have the science to support it. And I think it was a very, very good study. Um, the recommendations for that study were that a simple, well-designed sign can make a substantial difference. Again, people disturb birds accidentally. They don't want to disturb birds generally. So a sign could be a big help, letting them know, don't go past this point. This is what you look out for. Just telling people how to behave and what's appropriate at that site. One of the main problems is a lack of understanding and awareness. There was also a recommendation there that the addition of a warden during the season, in addition to signage, may further increase the effectiveness of the sign. Multiple management options working in cooperation have proved to be very effective elsewhere. So Great Saltee, I know this year has employed, the National Parks and Wildlife Service have employed wardens on Great Saltee to that effect, and that's equally exactly what we're trying to do here in Ireland's Eye as well. And just to give you some background to Ireland's Eye, 2016 and 2017, I'm not going to go through all of these, but we have reports. We've had Seabird field workers looking at the issue of disturbance in Ireland's Eye many times in the past, and some of the stuff they see is absolutely ridiculous. People photographing gulls, chicks scattering all over the place, gulls swooping at them and attacking them, those disturbed chicks getting attacked by other gulls, oyster catchers going crazy when people are walking on the beach, people, just some inexplicable behavior, to be honest with you. You can see the bottom there, the presence of two dogs, even though they're on leads, caused absolute pandemonium in the colony. Some of the real ridiculous examples, one year a child moved eggs from one great black-backed gull nest to another, creating a five-egg clutch. Another small child chased around and attempted to pick up a young great black-backed gull chick. Um, so obviously children done in all innocence. I don't know what the parents were doing at the time, but you can see the benefits of having wardens somewhere like Ireland's Eye. And then at the bottom there as well, the amount of people who get hit by gull attacks, quite often bloodied because they're in the wrong places at the wrong time and they don't know what they're doing. By putting wardens in place, we can reduce that too. So obviously what was happening before wasn't working for the seabirds and wasn't working for the people. And just Lorraine mentioned the way the island has been zoned, but you can see this is a map from 2016. This is where people were walking before any kind of significant attempt at signage or anything like that. People were going right through the areas with all the nesting seabirds, all the nesting gulls, all the nesting cliff nesters there at the north edge of the island. People are going right through all those areas. So in 2025, we have a designated path loop that's been put in place, fencing in key areas to really, really emphasize that you cannot go in on the kind of the hills and towards the cliffs, and information plinth to give people that background knowledge when they get onto the island, they can, learn a bit about, the island that they've just stepped onto. A lot of signage to encourage, people don't disturb, this is the Birds Island too. Dogs not allowed and unauthorized landings not allowed, just to kind of control the flow of people as well. So as part of that, then pilot warden scheme. So again, this is a pilot. We're going to take all the lessons we learned this year. We've had conversations with Lorraine and Fingal County Council and with National Parks and Wildlife Service and with Howth Castle as well. And hopefully we can improve next year. And that's the same with any of these types of conservation projects. Every year you learn a lot and you just try and refine it and improve it for the following year. So our two wardens, Siona and Emmett, As people landed, they would give them a briefing. They tell them what you can expect about the island, what's here, what's not here, which way to go, depending on what you want to see or what you want to do. Answer any questions, tell people about the birds, all that kind of stuff. So that's something that, for especially for people who haven't been to the island before, it's a really, really good introduction as you land at the island to help you get the best out of your few hours on the island, as well as, keep steering clear of the birds, and not causing them any problems. As well as that, they were monitoring footfall. They were looking at where the people are at different times and different days. They were looking out for specific disturbance events and logging all of those. And as well as that, all the people side of things, they were also doing a census of all the seabirds on the island, and monitoring their productivity. That is how their breeding success was. And in short, it was very successful. I think it went really, really well. Very, very positive feedback. We greatly reduced footfall to key nesting bird areas. So between the fencing, the signage, and the wardens, a lot of those areas with the key cliff nesting seabirds and a lot of the gulls as well, people were just avoiding them, which was great. Still disturbance at some areas and stuff we can work on in the future. But there seemed to be much fewer attacks as well, much fewer people getting bloodied by gulls. So people had a better idea what to expect, having, seen the signs and talked to the wardens. Most people obeyed all the rules about dogs, about drones, about where you can go. Some people didn't. Some people don't like being told what to do, especially people who maybe go out to Ireland's Eye every summer. I can understand that. We see that at other sites like Kilcool as well. Quite often, what you get is if you tell someone not to go somewhere that they're used to going, they will tell you where to go yourself, in no uncertain terms. But the next time they come back, they kind of know the situation and there won't be that confrontation, and they can probably stick to the paths. There are still issues with unauthorized landings that are kind of cause for significant concern. Huge amounts of people camping over the weekends, walking, off the paths, creating new paths, trampling habitat, and a lot of other stuff I'm sure that we weren't seeing when we weren't there. Barbecues and fires, a huge potential risk there to the entire island. So that's worrying and something we need to work on as well. Some disturbance of birds on the cliffs and on the water as well. And we've discussed with everybody kind of ways maybe we can target those people and just let them know kind of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of moving around the island on the water and not disturbing birds. Um, so most people were great. There was one cohort of people who unfortunately were not always so great. This is not just unique to Ireland's Eye. So going back to that Gannet study in Great Saltee, here are some quotes from it. Photographers were the only visitor group who didn't always comply with the sign. 31 approaches to within a metre of the colony were recorded, and all of these were photographers. Um, Loads of examples of it, and they were all photographers. So it's not to say that all photographers did this, but certainly when people were ignoring signs, going to places they shouldn't be, getting too close, they tended to be photographers. So UCC repeated that study on Saltee, but did it with puffins a few years later. And the students working on that noticed the exact same thing. And the people who were ignoring the signs, ignoring the wardens, tended to be photographers. And you can see the bottom bit there. The student witnessed a young child telling a group of photographers who had ignored the signs that they were supposed to step back, which is a ridiculous situation, really, when children are telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. Some quotes from our Ireland's Eye report this year. Photographers went on the hill to the cliff edge for at least an hour. Again, that thing of prolonged disturbance. Photographer walked down the hill and disturbed many gulls. Photographer did this, photographer did that. I know a lot of photographers. I consider myself a wildlife photographer. I'm going to show you lots of my seabird photos in this second part of this talk. But there is a problem with some wildlife photographers, and you would think that these are the people with a great appreciation for the birds, but quite often they maybe don't either have the knowledge to know that they're causing disturbance. So we have had incidents of people causing disturbance, taking photos of the disturbed birds and showing the wardens saying, look at this photo, isn't this a great photo? And the wardens can see that it's a bird screaming at the photographer to get away from my nest. Um, so that continues to be a problem. Hopefully something that will improve year on year, and hopefully, the better wildlife photographers can influence the worst wildlife photographers in that sense. Um, So just this is just a snapshot. So the guys, the wardens this year were monitoring where the people were. They do counts every 15 minutes over a couple of hours, and you can see the map on the left is in May, the map on the right is in July, and you can see much smaller dots, no dots in some places at the north edge of the island where all the cliff nesting species are, and a lot of the big gull colonies are too. So there's really, really good results in terms of people keeping away from those key areas. This is a graph of the number of disturbance events per unit of time. So the warden started in May, and you can see there's a drop off there from nearly 30 per weekend to around 10-ish. And then once the intervention there is the signs and the fencing, once that went in as well, there was a huge improvement. And when you consider this graph, don't forget that the number of visitors to the island greatly increases in June and increases again into July, especially this year when we had such a good summer. So the fact that the number of disturbances seen by the wardens over those months were kept at such a low level is a really, really good indication that what we're doing is working. So that's the wardening, that's the disturbance. As well as all that, the wardens were monitoring the birds. They were carrying out censuses of all the seabirds breeding on the island and productivity monitoring, which is following the breeding attempts to see how successfully they nest. Um, so they were, doing the census. You pick kind of a week in early June when most species are kind of should be on eggs, essentially. When you should get your peak numbers. You'll always get a few birds that are a little bit later, but you kind of aim for the peak. Recording all nesting seabirds using binoculars, telescopes, and even a drone, very carefully used on the island under license with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. But that was very effective in counting birds in some of the really hard to reach places. Um, I'm going to give you loads of results now, and I'm going to just talk about pairs of nesting birds. But depending on the species we're looking at when you're actually doing the recording, sometimes you're counting individuals, sometimes you're counting pairs, sometimes you're counting nests, and sometimes you're identifying territories where you can't necessarily see the nest. So I'm going to use pairs as shorthand, but essentially when we're doing the census, there's different units used. And this is really important to compare with previous years. How are all these birds doing compared to previous years? Compare with other sites. Is Ireland's Eye a certain species doing better or worse than Lambay or, the cliffs at Howth or Bray or something like that? This also feeds into national monitoring, the seabird monitoring program. There's a real lack of annual data for a lot of seabirds in Ireland being fed into that program, which really hinders our understanding of our seabirds. So it's great to get years and years of data for Ireland's Eye into that program. And actually, we prior to this in 2024, BirdWatch Ireland did a census and productivity monitoring in Ireland's Eye, and that was part of a bigger project along the East Coast funded by the Phase One wind farm companies. So we were doing work at a lot of other seabird sites as well. So it's great to have two successive years now, and hopefully there'll be more years to come. So I'm going to go species by species, and I can see the time there, so I'm going to fly through some of them. Gannet, biggest seabird we've got in Ireland. We have around 50 to 60,000 pairs. So the last big seabird census was done in the last 3 or 4 years, and the previous one to that was around 99, 2000. So looking back over 20 years, the Irish gannet population has increased by 33%. We now have 6 Irish colonies. Ireland's Eye was the fifth one to be occupied in Ireland, and Lambay was the sixth. The Irish population is about 11% of the international population. And you can see so these seabird censuses are done across the UK and Ireland. And you can see the Republic of Ireland trend there very much mirrors the wider picture there. In terms of the level of increase. So really, really big increases. Some facts there for you. One egg take about 44 days to incubate, 90 days to fledge. So they have a very, very long breeding season. And that is one of the problems recently when avian flu hit them. The fact that they have such a long breeding season means they're kind of sitting around and vulnerable and waiting for that to come. We have had avian flu hit some of our tern populations, but they have a much shorter breeding season. So thankfully, by the time it arrived in some of the colonies, a lot of the terns had already fledged and the adults had left. So gannets can be vulnerable in that sense. And again, they can live to over the oldest gannet recorded in the UK and Ireland is over 37 years old. A lot of these seabirds live very, very long lives. So, we should never get bored of the fact that we have these spectacular, weird, long-lived, incredible creatures, that are a short boat ride away from Howth. So these are the numbers of gannets on Ireland's Eye over the years. They were first seen in the vicinity of the island in 1985. 23 adults set up on the stack in 1988 with a little bit of courtship and nest building, but they didn't actually breed. They did breed in 1989, and the numbers have gone up and up since. So there's been immigration from a lot of the other colonies as they've increased. Gannets spread to Ireland's Eye. They've gone up and up and up more or less continuously, and then spread to Lambay just to the north shortly after that. Razorbills then, fantastic, fantastic birds. Just absolutely love that kind of white pinstripe going into the eye and on the bill as well. Ireland, Republic of Ireland, we have about 33,000 pairs, a very positive trend, up 19% over 20 years or so. The entire UK Irish population has increased by something similar to that as well. Um, there have been breeding failures in parts of the northwest of the UK. So it's not kind of, that's the average figure is up 18%, but in parts of Scotland especially, that's been linked to fishing activity and lack of food. Like I mentioned earlier, extreme weather events in the winter can be a big problem as well, cause significant mortality. And coming down the tracks, a lot of these climate models predict that their prey is going to shift around the place, and that's going to be a problem for them as well. Um, So looking back through the history, this goes back to 1969. They've definitely been on Ireland's Eye since at least the late 1800s, though we've no kind of numbers on that. And you can see about 200 pairs, 60s, 70s, 80s, increasing a bit more than that in the 90s, and up 400, 500, 600 in the early 2000s. And now we're up to much, much bigger numbers, 1,600 pairs-ish in the last 2 years. And you can see a slight increase from 2024 to 2025 as well. So the national population is increasing and the Ireland's Eye population is increasing a lot as well. Common guillemots then as well, you have to see these side by side with the razorbills, but completely outnumbering them. 178,000 in the Republic of Ireland. Very positive trend in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland, but actually the UK Ireland population is down by 8%. So I know there's been increases in England too, but huge declines in Scotland. That's been linked to very low productivity over a number of years, and declines in sand eels in particular, which they rely on. Um, you can see just a fact there, nest site, their nest site, they really only need 10 centimeters squared to put down an egg, and they'll kind of guard that, and that'll be their nest site for the entire summer, for the summer. One thing to look out for with guillemots in those hundreds and thousands of guillemots are bridled guillemots, which is a color morph. It's the same species, just look a little bit different. It's a very small percentage of the guillemots in Ireland have this morph, but by and large, the further north you go in latitude, the more bridled guillemots that are part of guillemot colonies. So you can see there 1% in southern England, 3 to 6% in Scotland, and over 50% in places like Svalbard. Guillemot numbers then, again, a very positive trend, mirroring the national trend over that time as well. 700-ish in 1969, over 1,000 in the 80s, over 2,000 in the 90s, and now we're at over 5,000 individuals, which is huge numbers for such a tiny island when you think about it. European shag, um, very positive trend in the Republic of Ireland. Nearly 5,000 of these birds in the Republic of Ireland. Huge increase of 40% in 20 years. The All Ireland population is quite significant at 2%. Across the UK and Ireland, there's actually been a big decline of 20%. So the Republic of Ireland is bucking that trend. There have been big declines of shags in Dublin and Wexford, but a lot of increases on the West Coast at the same time that have kind of balanced things out or put things looking maybe more positive than they are in certain parts of the country. Um, Again, big declines in this species in Scotland, and probably linked to food as well as mortality over the winter and stuff like that as well. On Ireland's Eye, numbers are doing pretty good despite the national level, the national picture, and even the East Coast picture. You can see that they kind of held steady at 70-ish pairs for much of the last 20 years. A bit of a decline this year. And that's, one of the reasons we want to do this multi-annual monitoring year in, year out is because if you just do 1 year of a census every 20 years, you're getting a snapshot. You don't know if that was a very good year or a very bad year. But by getting a few consecutive years, you get to see kind of what's the average essentially in the ups and downs. Because with seabirds, you do get big mortality from winter storms. You also get things like sometimes if the birds aren't in good enough condition, they might have survived, but they're not in good enough condition coming into the breeding season, they will take a year off and not nest. So multiple years of data is really, really useful to get a good average and see what the trend actually is. Cormorant then obviously very closely related to the shag. Actually, one of the things I failed to mention with the shag is that they likely benefited from the same thing as cormorants in that up until the 1970s, they were routinely killed and culled, and there was even a bounty on them that people, would get money for every cormorant that they killed. And obviously, shags, looking very similar and using similar habitat, suffered from that as well. So once the Wildlife Act came in the 1970s, birds are protected. Their numbers tended to increase and maybe tried to get back to the levels that they should have been at. Um, so you can see they have decreased in the last 20 years, unfortunately, down 8%. Most of that decline has been in coastal areas. They do breed at a few of the bigger inland lakes, Lough Derg, Lough Ree, and parts of the Shannon as well. And the UK Irish population is declining as well. What else have we got? Climate change as well, predicted to impact them quite negatively. And another problem for them is, and we don't have much data on this in an Irish context, but they do suffer from being bycatch in fishing nets and fishing gear. And that's a big problem in parts of Europe and the UK and the North Sea. But we just don't have the data for Ireland, unfortunately, but we can expect it is affecting them here as well. So there you go. There's your cormorant numbers. You can see they've virtually none in the 1970s. Eventually, when they did recolonize in the 1980s, the numbers went up gradually, consistently, up to a few hundred. Huge numbers in 2007. And again, that comes back to the multi-annual monitoring. It's hard to know if that was a one-off thing. Was there actual growth up to that? Was there some other colony abandoned and they temporarily relocated to Ireland's Eye? But you can see pretty consistently at 300 pairs on Ireland's Eye for much of the last 30 plus years, which is pretty good. Fulmar then, an absolutely bizarre bird. Look at that beak, and the more you learn about them, the more bizarre they are. I often remember be working on Rockabill Island off the coast of Skerries, and that's a tern colony. There's no fulmars, but two fulmars did land on the island, and my colleague said, "I think I can smell fulmars." And they have a very unique smell, like storm petrels do as well. And we've just peered gently over the cliff and we could see two fulmars. So he was dead right. He smelled it before he saw it. Um, in the Republic around 32,000 of them, declining trend, much bigger declines in the north, and quite big declines across the UK and Ireland, down 35% in 20 years. That's a very, very big decline. These are a species, they live a very long time. They only start nesting at 9 years old, if not older. They can live to 45 years at the very least. I'm sure they go to 50, 60, 70. They have a huge foraging range. A Scottish study showed birds heading out to the mid-Atlantic ridge, and there's been some work done on them in Ireland as well, I think, that shows something similar. You're talking thousands of kilometers um, on foraging trips when they're feeding their chicks in the middle of the breeding season, not just winter movements in the middle of the breeding season. So they live a very strange, hard life traveling those kind of distances. Um, the declines, I think people suspect that there's probably a lot of factors to blame. You're probably talking about things like climate change, maybe the banning of fishery discards, which has happened in recent decades, that probably benefited them to some extent. It might have even artificially inflated their numbers to some extent. But also, they seem to have had very low productivity for quite a while. And you get that with long-lived seabirds. They keep coming back and they keep coming back, and you don't quite notice that their numbers are declining, but they're not producing chicks. And if they're not producing chicks, you're only going to realize that 9 years later, plus, when it comes to fulmars. The numbers in Ireland's Eye, they did increase the 80s and 90s. 40 to 70 pairs. They're peaking in 1999, and they have declined since. And you can see a big decline even from 2024 to 2025. They went from 40 pairs to 20 pairs. Um, and sometimes you'd put that down to a bad year, but just knowing that the wider declines in fulmars, and looking at their productivity across a few different colonies, we suspect they have very low productivity on the east coast of Ireland. They are a species that we're worried about, and I suspect on the east coast, we could be looking at very serious declines in their numbers in the coming years. kittiwake, beautiful gull species, very different to all our other gulls. 25,000 pairs in the Republic of Ireland, down 36%. We see a big increase in the Northern Ireland, thankfully, but across the UK and Ireland, they're down 42% in 20-ish years. The IUCN, so at international level, they've been declared vulnerable, which is a really serious step, and they are undergoing huge declines. A lot of it linked to climate change, sand eel, lack of sand eels, overfishing, and sand eel recruitment because of climate change. Um, they were hit bad by avian flu in the last few years. There's potential concerns over offshore renewables for them. They're vulnerable to predators like, I know some sites, Sprayhead and Wicklowhead, hooded crows are a problem for them predating the nests, and even Howth, I think ravens as well as hooded crows. So they are species that are doing really, really poorly at the moment, and that we're worried about as well. And you can see the numbers quite, well over 1,000 in a couple of years there in the 1990s, but they've gone down and down and down. 2024, 300-ish and up a little bit this year, which is very welcome. Still very worried about them, especially with avian flu, continuing to hammer them. Then the three large gulls, I suppose, the species that really, you can't help but notice when you land on Ireland's eyes. We've the great blackback gull is the big photo there, the largest gull species in the world. Um, like I said, they're undergoing quite significant declines globally. In the last 20 years or so, they're down by 10,000 in Scotland alone. Um, 28% decline across Europe, 68% decline in North America. People have pointed the finger at banning of discards, general reduction in fishing activity, which they would have followed boats and benefited from in a lot of areas. They are at high risk of wind farm collisions. There's potential for, or not potential, but reintroduction of white-tailed sea eagles to places like Scotland has impacted them. They could be predated and bullied and everything else. That's been seen in Norway, so that would have impacted them in Scotland as well. Um, so doing okay in Ireland at the moment, the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, but very concerning bigger picture for great blackback gulls. Lesser blackback gull then it's a more herringull sized bird. That's the one down the bottom right there. They're migratory. So at the moment, all of our lesser blackback gulls, more or less, there's a few thousand that hang around on the south coast in the winter. But most of our lesser blackback gulls are now in places like southern Spain, the Algarve, Portugal, Morocco, and countries like that. Their numbers have gone up a good bit. And the inland sites as well. They breed at a few of the bigger inland lakes, and they've gone up quite a bit as well. We don't have a trend for the urban population, but lesser blackback gulls do nest on roofs in Dublin and other places. And the last estimate in 5, 6, 7 years ago was about 2,500 pairs of urban nesting lesser blackback gulls in Ireland. And then the herring gull, which is very much the typical seagull that people see everywhere. Um, all over Howth Harbour, all over North Dublin. They nest in considerable numbers in urban areas. So you can see 8,900 estimated nesting in urban areas in Ireland. But quite a positive trend there for the natural nesting population, which would be the population of, natural habitats and coastal islands as well. So on Ireland's Eye, these are the numbers for great blackback gull. 40, 50 pairs in the 1960s, gradually increasing. Very good numbers in 2007, and dropping back down since, but pretty consistently somewhere between 100 and 120-ish pairs. We don't mind a little bit of fluctuation, but we can see some consistency there, which is good. Um, Lesser blackback gull, unfortunately, there's only ever a couple of pairs really on Ireland's Eye. There's a much bigger colony of them on Lambay Island. We just think any birds that are recruiting either decide to nest in urban areas where there's a lot of food and very safe habitat, or they go to the big colony in Lambay and you only get a couple of pairs really trying on Ireland's Eye. Herring gull, then again, very much the standard seagull that people think about and picture. You can see there were huge numbers, the 60s up as far as the 80s. Botulism is something that impacted herring gulls and the other gull species very significantly in the 80s and 90s, caused huge, huge declines that they're still kind of recovering from, and a shift obviously to urban areas as well. But you can see the numbers have increased and they're kind of in that 500, 600 number on Ireland's Eye at the moment. And then the puffin, absolutely everybody's favorite, a very hard species to census, especially at national level. They nest in burrows. Some burrow nesting species like storm petrel and Manx shearwater, you can, under license, play a tape recording of a call into the burrow and they will respond to you. Puffins don't do that so much. So they're very, very hard species to account for. But the last attempt, national attempt, so they're down about 26%. So they're obviously a species very vulnerable because they nest in burrows, very, very vulnerable to predation by rats. Rats getting into those burrows, eating the eggs, eating the chicks. Um, Big declines in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. You'll have heard some positive news out of Rathlin Island and some other islands up the north recently where they've eradicated rats and the puffins, amongst other species, have started to bounce back very, very quickly. So at international level, they've been declared vulnerable to extinction, just like the kittiwakes. They are vulnerable. Um, there are species, I suppose, we know what we need to do to save them in a lot of places. Rat eradication, getting rid of mink and other species like that, top of the list, and they can bounce back. On Ireland's Eye, numbers have fluctuated over the years. Things like rats have limited their numbers, and the expanding great black-backed gull population has probably impacted their numbers as well. They will predate them to some extent, and they will steal their food as well and really put them under pressure. We weren't looking for burrows in the last couple of years. We really just count on the number of adults associating with the island. So it's not a super accurate number, but a lot of the burrows are on the more sheer cliffs, very hard to access. So very hard to properly census them in Ireland's Eye. But this year we had 8 adults hanging around those cliffs pretty consistently throughout the summer. So we imagine that the nesting numbers are probably somewhere between, 8 to 12, maybe 15 pairs or something like that. But you can see kind of kept at a pretty low number. And I am getting towards the end now, but Manx shearwater is a species that has bred historically on Ireland's Eye, but again, because of the rats and the great black-backed gulls, they're unlikely to recolonize. So they're a species that nest in burrows, just like puffins as well. They are present on Lambay Island, and I know there's talk about project there to deal with the rats, which would be absolutely fantastic for puffins and Manx shearwaters and other species too. Black guillemot then is another species you will see around Ireland's Eye. They nest under boulders. There isn't a huge amount of habitat for them, to be honest with you, on Ireland's Eye. I think a lot of the birds we see out there are the ones nesting in the cracks and the crevices in Howth Harbour. But they're a fantastic bird as well. And that's it. I know we're getting very close to 9 o'clock. If anyone has any questions, please do throw them at us. But just to wrap up, Ireland's Eye, it's a very significant colony. It's got over 9,000 breeding pairs of seabirds of 10, 11, 12 species. It's part of a bigger picture with the cliffs at Howth and Bray and Lambay Island as well. And really north of Lambay and south of, I suppose, Brayhead and Wicklow Head, there isn't much cliff nesting habitat for a lot of these seabirds. So Lambay is very significant. It's also one of the easiest seabird colonies to access and to see these birds. It's so easy to get out there. We shouldn't take that for granted. We're so lucky to have that. It's so close to Dublin, you don't have to drive a million miles to get there. So it's a great place for people to experience seabird colony. We just need to find that balance between the people and the seabirds out there, which I think we've taken great strides towards that this year. And we'll look to improve that and hopefully we'll get funding for this again next year and for many years to come and we'll keep tinkering with it and trying to improve it across all fronts. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of pressures and threats that seabirds are facing, but we've identified some that we can tackle here, and we're trying to tackle them. And it's great to have that data as well. You can see just having the numbers 2024, 2025. We'll be interested to see what 2026 brings, and we'll have a really good idea of how those species are doing. So there's just a summary of the numbers I was presenting there from 2024 and 2025. If anyone has any questions, I'll happily try and answer them. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's great. So thanks so much, Brian. If you could stop sharing there, you might get to see the chat then. So thanks a million, everyone. Thanks, Brian. That was a great talk. And I'll just go through some of the questions now. Just to say the recording will be made available. So I've even had a few people message me while you were talking there. They weren't able to attend this evening. But that's great. So I'll just start with some of the questions and still do put any questions in the chat. So there was a question here about you should put comprehensive signage on the West Pier in Howth. also. So no dogs, no fires, no drones. So just to say that is part of the plan. So we were getting a lot of the kind of harder infrastructure, the signage developed and everything this year. So the plan would be if we can get permission to put a large signboard up on the West Pier, but also then to say we're linking in with some of the kayaking groups, the sailing groups, in order to get that message out there as well. Um, so someone's just asked about where we can find the recording. So because we have everybody's contact details, when that recording becomes available, it can take a couple of days through Zoom for that to become available. Brian will then distribute that to everybody. Um, so let's have a look. Yeah, good few people missed the start, and that was understandable. I could see that in the numbers as well. And just to say, because we had some of the thanks at the beginning, Brian, and also the thanks, and I had a little look on the participants there. So we do have some people from national parks who are with us. So just to reiterate the project this evening, the census, the wardening, and that monitoring piece, we were able to do that with funding from the Local Biodiversity Action Fund from the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And as Brian said there, we'll be putting in another application this year, which will hopefully be successful, fingers crossed, to the people on the call uh, who make the decision. But yeah, so if anybody wants to ask any more questions, yeah, there's any plans for rat eradication. That was something actually I hadn't mentioned earlier. So we started to do a bit of rat control this season, but also find out, okay, where are the hotspots on the island for rats, which we managed to get to find. We also used a specific trap this year. It's actually an instant kill trap, so it's more humane. So we sourced that. That was part of the funding. It would be great to do a full scale rat eradication project similar to what, has been happening on Rathlin, Dorky Island is proposed, for some other offshore islands as well. Realistically, that's a life funded project. So I don't know if we'll have something for that. So what we can do is just keep investing and keep doing that sort of rat control. And I don't know, I don't want to eke people out this late in the evening, but also some of the rats that are on Islands Eye are actually then swimming over to Howth. So we're going to do a lot more rat control around that Howth Harbour area as well. That would be the plan for 26. So yeah, someone's asked me about hemorrhaging. Yeah, we used on Islands Eye as part of the stipulation of funding, we had to use a specific trap called a Doc 150. But there's actually anticoagulant um, uh, kind of pest control that you can use as well. So some of the this has been told to me secondhand, but some of the local rodent populations are becoming a little bit resistant to that. But if you were doing a life-funded project, that would be this type of scale that you would be looking at. And so that would be the type of thing. So I'll just throw this one to you, Brian. Says question here. So the kittiwake colony on Howth has spread round to Balscaddon in recent years. Is it possible they have moved there from Islands Eye? So that
Yeah,
kittiwake colony
I'd
was
have
there,
to have a
wasn't it?
look at the
Yeah.
numbers. So we have
Mm.
done a full census at Howth last year and this year, funded by the Phase One wind farm companies. So it's been great that we're able to build up this picture of multiple colonies in the same neighborhood because you do get that switching around of sites. I can't answer that for sure. I'd have to look into the numbers, but I like that is something they will readily do, especially after something like avian flu hits. Quite often these seabirds are very site faithful and they stick to the same place year after year until they fail or until something really bad happens, and then they're thinking, I better investigate somewhere else. So yeah, quite possibly. Be a lot of interchange there. But don't forget, there's also big numbers of kittiwakes on Lambay as well. We've had smaller numbers on Rockabill between 100 and 200 pairs, and they've gone up and down in the last couple of years as well. So yeah, there's probably a lot of moving around there. Um, it would be great to have more ringing projects to supplement, the census, I think is the first thing. If you walk into a seabird area, the first thing you want is census information to know how the population is doing. Second thing you want is breeding success, because that really does start to give you more a fine scale idea of why maybe population is going up and down. And the next thing you want is adult survival and an idea of immigration and emigration. And you get that through ringing birds. Unfortunately, that's very difficult to do with some cliff nesting seabirds. It's also very time intensive. We do ring the kittiwakes on Rockabill, and we do keep an eye out for them at the other colonies. And I should say it as well, but the Irish Midlands Ringing Group and Graham Prole and Jan Rod have put in a huge amount of effort into colouring in the gulls in Ireland's Eye for must be over 10 years now. And they've got a huge amount of information, and not just on Ireland's Eye, but a lot of the other islands in Dublin and a lot of the urban nesting birds. And they're looking at that interaction between, do birds from islands move to urban areas? Does it happen vice versa? And all that kind of stuff as well. So if anyone's out in Ireland's Eye or around Howth, keep an eye out for leg rings on gulls. And even if you want to report them to me in the first instance, I can send you on to Graham and to Jan.
And I think also as well, Brian, like I was just at another meeting this afternoon talking about the kittiwake colony. So again, there's disturbance, on Howth Head caused by walkers and visitors. And again, as you highlighted before, a lot of the time, it's not deliberate disturbance, it's people just not understanding. So again, that's measures that we need to look at for that part of Howth as well.
So just on that point, actually, you've reminded me. We have, we looked at the breeding success in different. What we do is study plots. We don't try and see how the breeding success of every pair of kittiwakes is. We look at 30 pairs here and 40 pairs there. We've done that in Howth Head for the last couple of years, and the area where people can get to the most, and people quite often go down there for selfies and stuff like that, has had zero productivity, fledged no birds for the last 2 years, whereas other parts of Howth Head have actually had very good productivity. So a very clear example there of the disturbance and the impact of disturbance. And we know that corvids are a problem there with predation and stuff as well. But yeah.
and again, that really just highlights, that importance of again of that, continuous kind of monitoring. So there was the census on Islands Eye, there's also the productivity, but as I say, that continued monitoring even in other areas, and you can then start highlighting, okay, where are these specific areas that are causing impacts. I'm conscious of time, but I still have a little bit of time, and Brian might do as well. But so if anybody has a question that maybe is too awkward to put in the chat, but they want to unmute themselves and ask that, I'm sure we would be able to do that. So if anybody would like to do that, you can let us know now. No, nobody's coming forward. But just to say as well, there's a huge amount of people that couldn't access or joined halfway through. So just to reiterate again, this recording will be online, and the intention is that we'll do more of this into the future. And hopefully, next year, all going well with funding, is that maybe some of the people on the call will come over to Islands Eye, actually get to meet some of the wardens and get to actually have a chat and actually find out about what you're actually doing, and also the birds, because this is part of a process in order to preserve what's a really important place. So okay,
Just
people
before
are
we go,
oh,
I
go on.
can see just that Siona and Emmett, I think, are both here.
Yes.
Live with the two wardens this year. In one sense, it's an absolute dream job, I think, getting paid to go out to somewhere like Ireland's Eye. But at the end of the day, it becomes, it's tough going as well, especially when you're
It
dealing with the
is, yeah.
people side of things. So I'm sure that some days they love going out and some days maybe less so, but they did a fantastic job. They're really thrown in the deep end, but they're really, really excellent. So we're very grateful to them for
And
all the
I
work that
and
they
I
do.
think as well because they the majority of people that they interacted with, were very positive. Or they had, a positive experience. But I do know that there was a lot of people that were rude to them and things like that as well. So yeah, thanks to the guys. They did a brilliant job. I'd also just on that note like to thank you as well, Brian, just for all your work on this project this year. There was a huge amount that went into it. Just even, all of the background of, putting all the protocols in place for the monitoring, looking at actually how you're going to monitor the visitor numbers, et cetera, et cetera. And Islands Eye, although it's just off the coast of Howth, it's a challenging environment to get out to on a daily basis. So I'd like to thank Brian as well as Sienna and also Emmett that are here. So I think that's it, everyone. We will leave you be for this evening. So thanks a million for for joining us, and especially this close to Christmas. And wish you all a very, very happy Christmas as well. So that's great. Thanks a million.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.